So first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. My day job is working for the Competition and Markets Authority. I'd imagine most of you haven't heard of us. We're the UK's equivalent of the FTC and the antitrust part of the DOJ. So that's Competition and Consumer Protection. Yeah. Well, the UK for the moment is. It's also a real pleasure to be here in particular. My day job is running a large department of data scientists and engineers. I rarely get the chance to read through papers end to end, so it was a real pleasure to read. And it's a fascinating topic, really important. So the law prevents a certain amount of discrimination based on fairness considerations, as we all know. That's very important. As I'm sure you're all well aware, there's certainly concerns about what might happen to algorithms, but actually a lot of potential good things that might be happening from algorithms as well. I'll throw into the mix a little bit. So I've been working in financial services, or until recently for about 20 years. I definitely think in financial services I'm a little bit more on the negative side. I think there's a lot of behaviors there that the algos might find, but obviously we've got to be empirical. Lending is a particularly excellent laboratory to study algorithms. It's particularly early, it's particularly well developed. So these are all brilliant context for the paper that Adair has created. So lots of questions we're interested in. So what types and how much discrimination? How is it changing with algorithms? What about discrimination might be changing with algorithms? Might we see this targeting of behavioral biases that I just alluded to? Or is it an ability to identify and exploit weak competition, as Adair's papers discusses? How much might discrimination and collusion interact? So the paper discusses collusion quite a bit, and there's a couple of authors, Timo Klein, Emilio Carvano, got papers on collusion. So certainly in the world that I live in, people are completely focused on the possibility of pricing algorithms learning to collude. So this which is just an interesting thing to throw into the mix. So from a policy perspective, we're really interested in understanding discrimination and what, if anything, we should be doing. So the paper, as they're focused on legitimate business necessity, but she also mentioned firms' costs. In particular, she's focused on credit costs, but actually any costs that are legitimately part of doing business are able to be passed on to consumers. So I'm going to come back to that. So the GSE grid are on note as well. So they've got really quite an amazing data set for my. So I've worked a little bit with mortgage data, certainly the people who know mortgages well. This is really quite the best array of things that have been put together. And there's some robustness which I'll come back to. In terms of what's happening with fintechs, this is basically a dummy for whether this is a fintech or not. And again, I'll come back to that. So the results, you just heard them, but basically we're seeing quite a lot of money on the table, but a few basis points. To be clear, these are smaller than previous estimates, quite a lot smaller. And also we're seeing some impact on acceptances as well. Fintech, 40% lower, price discrimination decreasing. So I guess the first thing to say for me is, recent paper from this year is finding actually if we look at really quite comparable loans, we can compare them completely in all kinds of ways so that they're totally comparable. We're finding very large degrees of price discrimination. So this 53 basis points is from the 10th to the 90th percentile. And we're seeing very large amounts of discrimination. So I just found when I was looking at the paper, where is the discrimination more prevalent? I'm really interested to understand what kind of variation might be seeing. So the paper discusses a number of times the idea of financial deserts that might be causing it. Well, can we actually try and get some understanding of that? We talk about there's obviously the idea that there might be some racism as well, where there's a bunch of different ways that we could get a different area. I mean, they really have a lot of power. Can we start disaggregating into different types, or what's large versus small lenders? Can we start disaggregating to various different types? There's lots of different ways you could do this. One way would be just interacting the minority dummy, in this case, with a whole series of other variables. So we can really start digging into what's going on. They've got the statistical power. Many of the T-stats are 20 or 30 in the paper, so you could really start trying to look. And what factors are being used to discriminate, and to what degree do we think they might be explaining the race result as compared to it being direct on race? So that actually ties into the paper that Ansgar presented yesterday. So 765 million a year is undeniably large, And just using the larger estimate for the purchases, we've got 7.88 basis points per year. That's an increase of 1.75% in total interest paid. That's $184 per mortgage per year. Sure, these aren't small, but actually 1.75 isn't that, and it's much smaller than previous estimates. How much we should care about race? Absolutely, of course we care about race, but how much should we be focusing on that versus potentially other forms of discrimination and trying to use them to understand the results we're seeing on race? Controlling for cost. So I've certainly been in financial institutions, modeling mortgages. There's many different fixed costs that you get for mortgages. These are really important, a whole variety of different fixed costs. Right now, in the specifications that are being used in the paper, you're actually basically assuming that the costs are proportional to loan size, and I just don't think that's correct. So that's fine, because I think we can control for loan size. There's various different ways we can do it. One, they've got so much statistical power, I think they could actually just look at groups of loans at the same size. But there'd be a whole variety of different ways we could sort of non-parametrically control for that. I really think, given the really good work they do to focus on legitimate business necessity, should this be the base specification as well? One thing that also occurs to me, so you've got this, so the lenders are holding sort of effectively next to no credit risk because of the GSE grid. But at the GSE grid, as you're moving from one point to the next, as you're going around the different boundaries when it comes to the credit score, you've got a sudden jump up in the costs to the lenders. That seems to be like very good identification for how much gets passed through. And if you start seeing things differentially being passed through, I think that's particularly powerful evidence. I'd really be interested to see that. Matching. So I'm not going to go into all the details here, so this is why it's mostly in grey. But this is unsupervised machine learning. This is k-nearest neighbour. I'm not a total slouch when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I read it a few times, and I couldn't totally get my head around it. So I got two of the guys in my team. So one's got a PhD in economics, one's got a PhD in applied mathematics. They're both from top schools. So I got them to kind of read through and try and understand what was going on. They couldn't fully, but they thought they could. Broadly, we think it's okay, but it's really hard to tell. There's definitely a few points where the description's wrong. It's described as a classifier. It's not a classifier. So it's fine, I think. We all think it's fine, but we'd just like that to be fully explained. So make clear what you're doing. Is this a standard form of record linkage? Most of the other papers in the literature don't really use this kind of matching. Could we just do something simpler and then see what happens? So fintechs perform better. Again, you've got amazing data. There's got to be some form of identification for fintechs in here. I would have thought some kind of rollout for at least some of the institutions. I would have thought you could, at least at minimum, I'm really interested in sort of decomposing the selection of borrowers into the fintechs. So at least we just understand that bit better. The second point I'm not going to sort of belabor because I think your results are interesting per se. But actually, we might really worry about the one element of discrimination actually becomes in anticipated discrimination. So people might be selecting themselves out of applying. And of course, we're not going to see that in the data. In terms of methods, there's basically what we're looking at here is kind of descriptive. Again, with sort of Ansgar's papers and others, they're using machine learning to look at the relationship between variables. What might be able to do with those kind of methods as well. Luckily, so on the I think the opportunity here, and you actually had this right at the end of your presentation, was a focus on maybe getting into some elements of almost kind of collusive elements and these kind of things. If you were able to do anything on discrimination and collusion, you're going to have all of the competition law and competition economics world just absolutely lapping up and being fascinated in your results. So I'd really suggest you focus on that. Basically, loans is a great laboratory. This data is quite amazing. It's a very clever methodology. But I'd love to see more on the behavioural results and really digging into those. And I think there's some opportunities to develop the analysis further. Look forward to the next session.